Hello, my name is Paul Harvey, and I'm the host at the podcast Life, Passion and Business.com. A podcast where we ask questions of people how to live a good life. How do you make this world work for you and do your best in that process? One of the things that came out of those conversations, and there've been over 500 of them, is that we need to look at sustainability. We need to have a way of living on this world where we are living within the finite resources that there are. And so back in 2022, I was asked by the Scottish Business Network to bring together some people and have a conversation around sustainability. And at that time, I met Gavin Lendon and Howard Gunstock. And we hit it off and we had a lot of fun having this conversation, and we decided to do it some more. So back in May 2023, we launched The Sustainable Old Men, a podcast about having conversations that need to be had, like flying, football. How are we going to change our world so it's more sustainable? Anyway, I thought I would bring the guys on for you today. I'm having two separate conversations, one with Gavin about ESG and science-based targets. And this is about how companies are moving us forward towards net zero. And Gavin is on the coalface on this. He works with companies in order to look at their ESG policy, which is the kind of framework around sustainability and good governance, and also how science-based targets are used in those organizations to measure their progress towards their net zero situation. Let's join the conversation with Gavin Lendon. Hello there, my name is Paul Harvey. I'm the host at Life, Passion and Business. I'm a coach and I do all sorts of things around sustainability. So today I'm delighted to welcome Gavin Lendon from Sustainology UK. Gavin, tell us a bit more about yourself.
It's always good to know that, Paul. So, I'll give you a little bit background about myself. I originally trained as a chartered accountant, worked in the City of London, made redundant in 2010, set up my own business thereafter, moved across to sustainability in about 2016, 2017, and eventually formed Sustainology as a pure sustainability service in 2021, 2022.
Lovely. So this conversation today is about the how sustainability, how net zero is happening, and how companies are guiding their way to this. And there's a couple of things like ESG and bits and pieces, these little buzzwords that pop out and pop around. And I know this is your bread and butter, so I thought I'd bring you on the conversation to tell us more about it.
Okay, so one part of sustainability is reduction of greenhouse gases within the atmosphere.
Yeah.
The terminology used with that around that area is slightly complex. You have net zero, you have carbon positive, you have carbon negative, etc., etc. But in simple terms, net zero is you basically cover all your carbon outputs with carbon inputs. So that would be basically all the emissions that we emit offset by trees or other carbon capture type vehicles. I believe you've spoken to Howard Gunstock, and he has a carbon capture methodology himself.
Yes, seaweed. So, yeah. So the idea for net zero is to somehow achieve balance, isn't it? In terms of that.
Exactly.
So how does a business go about doing that? What's the measuring process for a business? Because it's like, any business looking at their thing, obviously they're going to look at it and go, well, all right, we've got vans, we've got trucks, we've got energy, we've got lights, we've got machinery. These things all have an effect on some level, but there's more to it than that, isn't it? There's things going on outside the door that lead into the business, like I'm buying wood, or I'm getting it from Italy, or what have you. There's that journey, isn't there?
That's correct. And the journey to net zero is slightly complex, but with every journey, you first have to establish where you're starting from.
Right.
And this brings in another phrase that people will be familiar with by now, I should imagine, which is the carbon footprint.
Yeah.
The carbon footprint is basically an expression of how much carbon does your business emit When I say carbon, I am using the phrase interchangeably with all greenhouse gases.
Okay.
So that would include methane and nitric oxide, etc., etc.
Okay.
Now, Paul, you touched on a good point, which is talking about where does your business begin and end?
Mm.
So, what is the boundary of your business? So, in terms of the greenhouse gas protocol, which was set up to actually standardize carbon footprint production and carbon accounting,
Hmm.
um, you have three different types of emission: scope one, scope two, and cunningly, scope three.
Hmm.
Scope one is basically your direct emissions, which would be the emissions that you emit as a function of the process you undertake. Most businesses that have quite low scope one emissions, because
Unless
they don't.
unless you're a fuel a manufacturer producing stuff and using heat
Exactly,
and gas and that sort
exactly.
of stuff. Yeah.
So we had one client that just produces concrete.
Right.
Producing concrete is quite carbon intensive.
Okay.
So that's scope one. Scope two is your indirect emissions, which are a function of the power that you use. So that, in essence, in simple terms, that's your electricity and gas bill.
Okay.
And scope three covers, as you touched on, all other aspects of your business. So for most businesses, that will include business travel, employee commuting, working from home, uh, stuff they buy and sell, but sorry, stuff they buy in terms of services and products, and any investments they hold and such like that. There are 15 categories under the greenhouse gas protocol for scope 3 emissions.
Hmm. Right. So is all of this kind of work all related to greenhouse gases? Is everything that you in terms of sustainability all around the greenhouse gas problem?
I'm going to interpret your question two ways. In
Okay.
terms of carbon accounting, yes, it's
Yes.
all to do with the greenhouse gases.
Yes.
In terms of sustainability, sustainability is much, much wider than pure
Yes.
carbon accounting and get greenhouse gas
Yes,
emission reduction.
because CO2 is the thing that makes the headlines, but there's a lot more to it, isn't there? There's a lot more to this sustainability malarkey, what with biodiversity and
Absolutely,
planetary
absolutely,
boundaries and all sorts of other things that are hardly touched in the
absolutely.
media.
I agree, and it's interesting because you touch on that, and I've literally come off a webinar where the UN social development performance indicators were discussed. So UN SDPI, as
Hmm.
it's affectionately known, and that is totally tied up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular the planetary boundaries, which is a more recent thing, and also Kate Wayworth's donut economic model.
Hmm.
So there's progression even now in terms of wider sustainability.
You mentioned the donut economic model, which is a whole new rabbit hole for us. So perhaps we shouldn't go there. But the principle is that the majority of economics doesn't take in the externalities, as in the environment. We allow the atmosphere to be an open sewer. We don't take in those externalities. Whereas the donut economics says no, we take it all in, so it's shaped like a donut because you cannot go beyond the edges of the donuts.
Absolutely. In a simple example, would be a farmer. So a farmer completes his accounts, records how much he's sold, how much he's grown, how much he's paid for in terms of pesticide,
Mm.
and feeds, animal feed, etc., etc. He doesn't include the cost of polluting the river where his pesticide's gone into the water table, into the river, and has gone downstairs and downstream. And I don't know. I was going to say use the phrase poison someone, but that might be a little bit harsh.
Yes, probably. A
Yes,
bit harsh, but we know that agricultural runoff is a problem. So and I
absolutely.
think farmers are actually measuring agricultural runoff these days. They cannot allow water to directly go into water systems. Not that our water companies do anything about it, but officially they're not supposed to.
I was about to say the farmers are doing a good job, the water companies less so.
So there's this thing that gets bandied about, which is, and I put in our show title, which was ESG, which is
Yeah.
gets talked about a lot, and in some places it becomes quite political. But without avoiding the politics of ESG, what actually is it?
ESG, first of all, we should start with what it stands for,
Okay,
which is environment, social, and governance,
right.
um, which is an interpretation of people, planet, profit, which is another uh, metric, for want of an expression.
Hmm.
Most companies, finance directors like ESG because it's quantifiable,
Is this
whereas
businesses of a certain size though? This is not the kind of general average Joe or the average small company, is it? This is larger operations.
any company can undertake ESG. Um,
Okay,
but what you're driving towards, I suspect, is the ESG metrics such
right,
as EcoVadis,
right.
which actually rate companies based on their ESG performance. Um, so basically, if we take EcoVadis for sake of argument, EcoVadis will ask Paul Limited how they're doing in terms of their environment strategy, how they're doing in terms of their social strategy, how they're doing in their governance strategy. That generates a score. That score will give them either a bronze, silver, or gold, or if you score less than 50%, you get nada. Um, so people are using those ratings as a function to make them more attractive to investors and lenders because as you touched on in the introduction, ESG as a standalone, as distinct from carbon accounting, has become much more powerful in terms of the economics of the current environment. A high ESG rated company is more attractive to investors because it is seen to be doing more things that are perceived to be beneficial
Hmm.
and therefore better investments. So if you take at the other extreme, a fossil fuel company
Hmm.
is seen as bad because in the long term they will have stranded assets because people will not invest in oil and gas in some point in the future. Clearly not today, but it is coming eventually.
So, of the areas, I mean, sustainability, ESG, sustainability is one of those things. Was it economic? What was the names again?
The E
Yeah,
is environmental.
environmental. Okay, and the
Yeah. That the S is social, the G
socials.
governance.
Okay, all right. So, what is that? What is the social and governance? How are they relevant to that? To in terms of the ecology of the world as such? What does that? How does that apply?
Okay, so have you discussed or mentioned with any of your other speakers the UN
No,
Sustainable Development
no, I
Goals?
haven't.
Okay, so as a function of the various COPs that we've been having, um, the Sustainable Development Goals came out of that, and the UN chose 17 goals to achieve by 2030 that would make the world a better place.
Hmm.
In simple terms,
Right.
that would include improving water supply, improving health, improving quality, uh, reducing consumerism. Whether that's happened or not is another story. Improving life on land, life at sea, life in the water, collaborations, improving cities and communities. They were all very, very laudable goals. And in the link to this, we will put them in so people can go straight to the website.
Hmm.
As part of those, you will have some social and some governance included. So one of the more familiar social metrics is the diversity and the gender balance within a company.
Right.
So, for example, a number of construction companies are now trying to increase the number of women in construction,
Okay.
which is a very laudable goal. And as a consequence, they are actively recruiting and promoting courses to encourage more and more women to actually study construction and the trades.
And the governance area of this, of the ESG, what's that about? Does that mean because the company's governed by a board and it's ultimately by shareholders, I would imagine.
Correct. And how is that board? What's the gender split of that board? Would be a governance question.
Okay.
Also, how important is sustainability to that board of governance? Is it delegated to a sustainability manager that's on the third tier of the management
Yes,
hierarchy?
of course. Yes.
If it is, it's not going to score very
Yes.
highly in terms
Yes.
of its governance.
Does the sustainability guy sit at the table or does he sit in the back office somewhere?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Have you seen that,
Um,
Gavin?
which one?
Have you seen that in your
Yes,
experience?
absolutely.
Oh, we'll give it to Shirley because she's at the back office there. We'll give her the job.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been it's been a learning experience. So 3 or 4 years ago, someone was just given the job. We'll just
Yes.
we'll get a tick in the box. We'll
Yes.
give a job to someone. Now, more and more regulations are now pointing to it must be discussed at board level.
Right.
So you see the quality of the people doing sustainability has improved dramatically.
Well, it's a job, not an add-on. That's the beauty of it. That's the
Exactly.
difference.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's
But
my flippant just give it to Shirley comment was it's a job. It's
absolutely.
just we'll just pass it on to someone. Whereas actually this is actually a role that needs to be filled properly.
Absolutely. Sustainability, uh, in terms of the board and in terms of the company, everybody is motivated differently. I heard a great phrase this morning. Um, People are either motivated by the heart, the head, or the pocket, or some combination of the three.
Yeah.
So your finance director is usually pocket motivated. How much is sustainability going to cost me? Can I make savings? What's the opportunities? What's the risks?
Yeah.
Whereas senior management might be more head motivated. Is this a good, sensible decision? What's the pros and the cons?
Yes. How will we be perceived with this? Yeah.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And then the heart is we've got to do this. It's the right thing to do.
Yes. Yes. Interesting. And the other aspect of what you do, of course, is science-based targets. And have we seen that growth in science-based targets over the last few years?
You've chosen probably the best week to ask that question. But I better just take a step back.
For our watchers here, this is Gavin's happy face.
Yes. But taking a step back, we're going to carbon accounting and net zero. Once you've done your carbon footprint, great. You've done your carbon footprint. It's
Yeah.
told you that you've got 150 tons of carbon or greenhouse gas emissions per annum. Okay, brilliant. What can you do with it? If the objective is to achieve net zero, then science-based targets is possibly the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Science-based targets takes your carbon footprint, projects forward to a certain point in time, which you decide to demonstrate a reduction in those greenhouse gases to try and achieve or try and maintain the 2015 Paris target of keep limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees.
Yeah.
And if you want to take it out to a longer term, by 2050, they'll be pushing you towards a net zero
Mm.
mission. The reason why that is incredibly interesting to ask me that question now, and I appreciate that it's Earth Day,
Mm.
but Science Based Targets Initiative last week removed a large number of companies from their rota, for want of expression, because none of them were doing anything towards achieving their net zero targets or their long-term targets. Those organizations included such clever ones such as Unilever, Marks and Spencers, Microsoft, and Procter and Gamble, all of whom have got sustainability strategies. So it's an interesting dynamic about what is happening.
So at last, this is actually starting to have teeth. It's starting to bite, and these people are
Yes,
having to start doing what they say they're doing rather than pretending to.
absolutely. Science-based targets doesn't cost anything to actually it does cost something to apply, but science-based targets as an organization is a non-profit.
Yeah.
So they have no motivation to remove people from their quota, their rota, I should say,
Yeah.
apart from those people who are basically just wasting their time.
Yes. Yes.
So these organizations made no effort to achieve the science-based targets, and as a consequence were removed. And I think they've had a fair share of bad publicity as a consequence. Not science-based targets, but the organizations involved.
So, but to round us up on this conversation, ESG effectively is not something. It's something that we won't experience ESG on a daily basis with people. But this is one of the tools that is being used to guide people down the road towards a net zero transition.
In a sense, yes. The net zero transition would fit into the E
Yeah.
of ESG,
Right.
but the E does include other aspects, such
Right.
as biodiversity, such as water
Right.
and non-pollution.
Hmm.
So yes, it is a way to map out your journey. ESG, in essence, is a way to actually plot your route to achieve certain things, net zero being one of them.
Hmm.
A better planet for all might be another.
That's a nice thing. On Earth Day, best
We like
planet
that
for
one.
all. I like that one.
Thank you.
So to sum us up, to finalise the thing, I mean, as someone just observing this today, will we start to see more of this stuff? Will we start to see this becoming more prevalent?
Yes, definitely.
Because in your experience, you're in the industry, you've been working with this for years. So I guess you must have experienced some change yourself.
Absolutely. So we're going to delve into a little bit of politics, not too much, but
Okay.
a little. So we are sitting on our little island happily next door to Europe.
Mm.
And the EU has progressed much further than we have so far. Earlier this year, their European the European Sustainability Reporting Directive and reporting standards came into effect.
Hmm.
So, as a consequence of that, companies in Europe are now obligated to report on sustainability every year, whereas in the UK, it's still fairly optional.
Mm.
We have certain things we report on, emissions, that has to be reported on under the SECR guidelines, but that's only for large companies. Europe has gone so much further, so that European companies now have to report on emissions, um, social value, and biodiversity, and governance, and what they're doing in terms of the local community. So very, very progressive.
And that will put pressure on us, no doubt, because those companies trying to export into Europe will feel the pressure of that.
That's the political angle.
Mm.
The UK has to make a decision whether it's going to align more with the Europeans, or if it's going to align more with the Americans. If we're going to align more with the Europeans, which is Labour's stated objective, then we're more likely to see more of this kind of regulation coming into effect.
Only time will tell. That's all I can say with that
You
one.
sound extremely happy about that, Paul.
Well, Gavin Lendon, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us today. Obviously, we've just scratched the surface of what is a very, very detailed conversation. But at the end of the day, science-based targets and ESG are all taking us in the right direction. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, Paul.
Cheers. And that was myself and Gavin Lendon from Sustainology UK talking about science-based targets. I hope you found it useful.